Do you know that 80% of cyber attacks involved compromised identities? 80%. That's a big number. In our increasingly digital world, it's becoming harder, but also more important than ever to be able to protect and defend digital identities for our organizations. What organizations truly need to adopt is an ITDR strategy. And ITDR stands for Identity Threat Detection and Response. So over the next 5 minutes or so, I'm going to discuss the 5 things that you need to know to build a strong ITDR strategy. So let's get to it. Okay, let's talk about identity threats. So there are a variety of different types of identity threats that could create severe consequences for your organization. Those consequences could include financial loss, reputational damage, operational outage, or maybe something much worse. So we're going to go through 4 common identity-related threats. And the first one is called social engineering. In a social engineering attack, the attacker is going to pose as someone of authority, someone that their target should implicitly trust. Maybe they'll pose as a member of the IT department. Maybe they'll pose as an employee of a third-party software company. And in this scenario, the social engineer, the attacker, is going to try to extract sensitive information from their target. They may also try to get their target to do something, maybe download a file that could infect their system, for example. So let's talk about phishing attacks. So in a phishing attack, you still have your bad actor, and they're running a social engineering style attack. But in this scenario, they may be reaching out to their target either via email or maybe through their mobile device. And the added level of detail is going to include some sort of formal-looking, professional-looking message that is sent to their target. And the advantage for the attackers, they can send out hundreds of phishing emails, thousands of phishing emails very quickly through automation. And again, in a phishing attack, very similar to social engineering, it is a social engineering attack. The attacker is seeking to either collect information or to get their target to take some sort of action that can help the attacker gain an advantage. Maybe they're going to gain access to your organization. Now, this leads to the next style of attack that I want to describe, called a data breach. And in a data breach, the attacker is trying to gain information. They're trying to extract data from either your network or from one of your trusted applications. And in this scenario, the attacker is able to get not just one identity and password, but they can have the potential to get a whole boatload because they capture maybe the entire identity database. And then they're in a position to use all those identities against your organization, and they can launch a variety of attacks to gain access and to forward the type of attack they're trying to launch. Now, finally, let's talk about what happens when a third party gets breached. So we just covered a data breach to your organization. But what happens if an organization gets breached that has nothing to do with you? Maybe a hotel chain, maybe a software as a service company gets breached. Well, in this scenario, you may still be at risk. And the reason why you may be at risk is because your users are probably like most users, and they reuse passwords. So I may use one password to log in to my job, to my enterprise, and I might use the same user ID and password to log into a hotel chain or to log into some sort of video account. And if one of those third-party services get breached, my credentials are in the hands of a bad actor, and they may use those credentials and launch an attack back towards our organization. That's challenging. So again, this may all start to feel a little grim, but let's change gears and start outlining our strategy to minimize the likelihood and impact of these types of threats. Now let's talk about preventative controls to help you avoid a potential identity threat. And we're going to start by going over some basic best practices that you can apply in your identity detection and response strategy. So let's first talk about employee training. One very powerful best practice is to run and organize regular training of your users so they're aware of the indicators and the signs of a potential identity threat so they can avoid it in the first place. Make sense? Let's talk about your passwords. Passwords are the gate, right? They're the authentication method that lets a user get access to the resources that they need. But passwords are vulnerable. So it's important that you use strong passwords, but passwords aren't enough because they're too easy to capture, to steal, and to crack. So for this reason, our ITDR strategy is going to include multi-factor authentication. A multi-factor authentication is a second authentication mechanism that you add to a password. So it might be a biometric fingerprint. It might be a device that you have, like your phone, where we can send a message to authenticate you before logging in. It's something that we add to the password to make it even more difficult for a bad actor to break past the authentication mechanism. Let's cover the last best practice that is really important. And in this final step, we're talking about testing, validation. So many organizations apply regular penetration testing to test the strength of their preventative controls. Hiring a third party that can act and pose as a bad actor will allow you to determine how well your preventative controls are working, help you identify weaknesses in your preventative controls and overall strategy, and then help you determine how you can close those weaknesses, how you can get better over time. Now, when you combine these best practices, you're going to significantly reduce the potential risk of having an identity-based threat occur in the first place. So let's talk about threat detection, identity threat detection. So unfortunately, it's likely that at some point your organization is going to have to deal with some type of identity-based threat. The good news is there's technologies, procedures, and services that you can adopt to help you detect and also respond to these threats when they do occur. So let's talk through some of the options that you have. So first, let's talk about security, information, and event management technologies. A security information and event management platform, or as we call them, SIEMs, is a platform that allows us to aggregate all of the different identity activity logs from applications, from your network, and run analytics against it to help identify malicious or potentially abnormal identity activities and then alert your security team so they can take action. Second, there's a new breed of identity defense technologies that you might have heard of. And these are called ITDR, Identity Threat Detection and Response Solutions. An ITDR solution is similar to a SIEM, but it's very narrowly focused. It only focuses on identifying the identity style threats, where a SIEM you can use more broadly, not just simply on identity. The other interesting thing about ITDR solutions is many of them allow you to automate the initial response actions. So you can program an ITDR solution to take initial action. Now, whether you choose a SIEM or whether you select an ITDR solution, you're going to need a team. You're going to need people. And you want this team to understand the context of identity threats. And ideally, you need this team to be available 24 hours a day because the attackers never rest. Actually, they prefer to attack you at night and on the weekends to catch you off guard. So one option is to build your own team, hire your own resources. Another option is to get help. You can hire a managed detection and response service provider, and they can bring the expertise, they can bring the technology if you want, and they can run the 24/7 detection process that you need to identify these threats when they occur. So now that we covered some of the key detection methods and options that you have, let's talk a little bit about response. Okay, so assuming that you're still with me and you haven't ran off to go invalidate all your identity detection controls, let's pivot a little bit and talk about response. So it's very important to have a well-detailed and defined response plan that you can enact when identity threats are detected. And your plan should consider a number of discrete sets of activities. So first, how's your organization going to investigate a potential threat that's identified by a detection technology? Second, what are the actions that your team can use to mitigate that threat? Some common actions might include blocking access, removing an identity from the network, resetting a password. And as you think about these different mitigation steps, you need to consider the third point, your communication plan. Because remember, these identities are attached to people that are trying to do their jobs, they're trying to use their identities for legitimate purposes. And if you're going to disrupt their workflow, you're going to have a very clear communication plan so you can contact them. Finally, I should also mention a specific type of identity threat that we haven't yet spoke about, but requires a unique approach to response. And that threat is called an insider threat. Sometimes you'll have a legitimate user that has access inside your organization, and they become the threat actor. They start doing bad things with their identity. You may be able to detect the insider threat, access, but when it's time to take action, when it's time to respond, you're going to have to do some different things. You might need to contact legal. You might need to involve HR. You might even need to involve external law enforcement. So in this scenario, your plan is going to be incredibly important. So now that we talked about our response plan, let's start to look towards the future. So now as we're beginning to round out your ITDR strategy, let's talk about future trends that you should be thinking about. And I'm going to draw my crystal ball, and I'm going to make some predictions on things that might happen in the future that could impact your strategy as you go along. So let's first talk about your passwords. What's happening with your passwords? Have you heard of quantum computing? If you haven't, that's okay. But what you need to know is that computing research has been advancing at a breakneck pace. And many believe that within the next 10 years, a new type of computing called quantum computing will allow bad actors to break encryption and to crack passwords in minutes, instantly. And this is going to create an enormous risk for all those passwords out there that our users are using every day to get access to their systems. A little scary, but there's also some good news. Also, within the next several years, it's expected that passwordless authentication is going to become much more important and much more highly adopted. Even today, there's options that you can use to remove passwords from the authentication process altogether and replace them with a stronger authentication mechanism, like a biometric, like a device that you have, like some two-way communication that needs to occur uniquely each time a user authenticates. Now, how about AI? Another interesting future trend that we're all talking about right now. AI is impacting everything we do. Have you heard about a concept or a technology called deepfakes? Deepfakes is a type of media that can be created using AI that can allow a person to replicate someone else's voice, someone else's image. They could create a video. Maybe in the future, They'll be able to do very live simulations where they're simulating a different person in a very believable way. The challenge with deep fakes is it arms the attacker with a very powerful social engineering tool. Imagine if your boss, CEO, CRO, any leader in your organization was impersonated by a bad actor in an incredibly convincing way. What if they could do it via video? What if they ask you to take some action, like give them sensitive information, get them access to important data? If it looks like your boss and it sounds like your boss, you may be more likely to do it, especially if you haven't yet been trained, you're not yet vigilant to understand the risks of deep fakes. So it's an important consideration, but there is good news. Security researchers are continuing to invest in mechanisms to use AI to improve our ability to detect new and emerging threats. These tools continue to advance, and they're going to help us stay ahead of things like deepfakes and other threats that haven't yet emerged. Identity detection and response is a fundamental aspect of cybersecurity. It requires proactive measures and ongoing vigilance. By continuing to understand the evolving threat landscape and adopting and evolving our detection and response approach, we'll be better prepared to defend our organization's identities and data. Thanks for watching. Please remember to click like and subscribe to our channel. And if you click that bell icon, you'll be notified the next time we release more content.